Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in philosophy we will be talking about answers to skepticism. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert Dr. Ajay Verma. Dr. Verma is Associate Professor in Center for Philosophy in School of Social Sciences, JNU. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you. Hello viewers, today in our discussion we will be talking about skepticism and the possible answers to it. In order to do that, first of all we need to understand what do we generally understand by the term skepticism. So skepticism, as many of us would know already, is a kind of an epistemic stance towards the possibility of knowledge at all. So skepticism basically refers to an epistemic stance according to which knowledge in the sense of absolutely firm ideas, knowledge in the sense of indubitable foundations, that kind of knowledge is not possible at all. So that is the kind of stand a philosopher who sort of qualifies to be called as a skeptic, would have towards the possibility of knowledge. So now, having understood what skepticism generally means, we could now sort of look at how skepticism as a possible as a skeptic as an epistemic stance has changed from the earlier times to the modern times. So now when we look at some of the earliest philosophers who had such kind of idea about the possibility of knowledge, then we find that in ancient forms of skepticism, which includes some such philosophers in early Greece, and there were there were a number of such philosophies that existed in ancient times in India as well. So, when it comes to ancient form of skepticism, the general idea is to suspend our judgment, to suspend forming a judgment about different objects in the world, about the world as such. Also, what does it mean? It means that after having received any kind of sense data from the external world, we form some kind of judgments about the world. So say for example, there could be an object before us, and sort of we receive certain kind of sense data coming from there, and then finally we form a judgment. For example, this is a table, or this is a chair, or so on and so forth. So, but do we have enough reasons to call it by a specific name, or to apply a certain a particular concept to it? This is something that a skeptic argues about. So skepticism as a position basically involves suspending judgment. But in the ancient times, this epistemic stance was also connected with emphasis upon good life and liberation. So the general idea was that suspending judgments is always conducive to good life and liberation. So, basic some of the arguments that were offered, in favor of skepticism was that the actual reality, the truth about the world, basically is beyond the reach of mind, and in that sense, it's beyond the reach of reasoning. So the main idea is that the truth about the world is not of such a kind that we would be able to understand it through our mental capacities. So we require some other kind of capacities in order to know the truth about the world at all. So, which could mean that maybe certain schools would believe that truth about the world is rather available to our aesthetic sensibility. There could be other schools saying that it's something that you may intuitively know. So there could be several stands regarding what how the truth about the world could be known, if not through our mental abilities. So in ancient forms of skepticism, the general idea that we come across is that we should suspend judgments, we shouldn't form any sort of well-defined specific judgments about the world, because it is conducive to good life and liberation. Because if we form certain ideas, concepts about the world that we live in, then those kind of concepts, those kind of ideas we form about it overall are more conducive, or take us towards suffering rather than towards good life, or rather than towards liberation. So, in ancient forms of skepticism, about which we may sort of dwell upon in more detail in some separate section. So, but overall, in ancient times, skepticism was also not only an epistemic stance, it was also in certain way a kind of a soteriological stand. I mean, it was intimately connected with some kind of soteriological program that a particular school of skepticism may have to offer. But when it comes to some of the modern philosophers who argue in favor of skepticism, so in more modern times, we see skepticism as a challenge to overcome, to demonstrate the possibility of knowledge edifice with the firm foundations. So in the more modern scenario, the basic idea behind skepticism is skepticism is basically taken as a possible stand against the possibility of knowledge, where what we understand by knowledge is not ordinary cognitions, but knowledge in the sense of absolute knowledge, in the sense that a certain kind of knowledge which is immune to any kind of falsity about it. So knowledge in that sense. So as a matter of fact, ever since more or less after Enlightenment in Europe, the basic idea about knowledge was a kind of knowledge which could be empirically tested. Knowledge basically sort of meant having beliefs, ideas, which could be empirically tested and proven to be true, and then held to be which could be held as knowledge, as cases of knowledge per se. So for that, the idea was that some kind of absolutely firm foundation was required. So when we have certain beliefs which were absolutely immune to any arguments against them, or which were absolutely immune to any doubt, any possibility of doubt about them, then probably from those firm foundations, we could go on further and further and build upon certain other knowledge statements, such that this enterprise of knowledge could could grow forever, and it would always be backed up by certain indubitable beliefs, which would always forever provide firm foundations to our overall knowledge edifice. So that was the idea regarding that sort of got associated with science generally, and that got a lot of currency, especially after Enlightenment. So now, having said that, we first of all need to look at how skepticism becomes kind of plausible or possible at all. So, from where? I mean, what are the skeptics' resources? What are the resources that a skeptic philosopher uses to prove his point, to make his point? So, what happens in that case is, we generally have reasons to have some kind of incredulity towards our sense experience. So, and why does that happen? What are those reasons for us to have incredulity towards sense experience? Because many a times we come across situations where a certain object seems to be of a certain kind, but on closer examination we find it to be something of some other nature. So such scenarios, such situations of error happen with us many a times. This is not something we are not accustomed to. So now what a skeptic does is, a skeptic turns these local error situations into possible universal scenarios. So what happens, what a skeptic does is that these situations which are most often in our daily lives appear before us in forms of error situations, and those are errors because we later on come to understand the real nature of the object under observation. But skeptic projects them as possible universal scenarios. So skeptic's argument would be, what if we are still in an error situation? What if when you are watching this lecture, you are in an error situation? What if you were dreaming? So, these local kind of situations like dreams, like errors, are projected as possible, universal scenarios. And, skeptic from there raises, the questions like, what if, this was happening to us all the time? What arguments could we have, to demonstrate that right now we are not dreaming, and so on and so forth. So this is how our sense experiences our sense experiences never seem immune from the possibility of there being dream situations, the possibility of there being error situations, and so on and so forth. Similarly, a certain kind of skepticism could also be placed against the reasoning as such. So, what happens? How could we sort of put even the reasoning in the case of reasoning? Under skepticism. So Descartes, provides a possible argument against, even the way our mind functions, or the way, we reason out about things. So what Descartes says is that, of course, the mathematical truths are something we often believe, are not sort of contingent to a particular location, are not contingent, to a particular time. So 2 plus 2, would always be equal to 4, whatever world we may be imagining, whatever space and time situation we may be imagining. But Descartes turns it into puts even such mathematical truths into sort of skeptic, he puts even such kind of mathematical truths under suspicion. How does he do that? He asks us to imagine that there could be some kind of evil genius, some kind of devil, so to speak, who has influence over our mind, or who may be sitting inside our mind, so to speak, And each time we calculate 2 plus 2 or similar other kind of calculation, each time we perform any mathematical calculation, this person, this evil genius puts inside our mind a certain idea about the answer, which is actually never correct. So maybe the overall argument is maybe 2 plus 2 is actually not equal to 4, maybe it is equal to 6, or maybe it's equal to 7. But evil genius makes us think each time we are sort of doing this possible calculation. He makes us think that 2 plus 2, instead of being equal to 5, which may be the actual truth about it, he makes us think that it is actually equal to 4. So these are some of the possible ways how skeptic turns like how skeptic sort of presents arguments against sense experience and also towards reasoning. So these are largely speaking the tools and resources that a skeptic uses. So now, having understood this, let's talk about some of the main arguments, in modern philosophy. Main skeptic arguments that are often taken up and answered by some of the modern philosophers. So now, two main arguments that we find many of the modern philosophers responding to are one, Descartes' evil genius argument, and the other one is brain in the wet example. So what is Descartes' evil genius argument? We just discussed. So this argument is basically that maybe there is an evil genius which influences our mind all the time and makes us believe what actually is not the case. So main idea here is maybe the world around us and all the mental functions that we are performing are in our mind. So basically what it means is world, whether it's outer world, if there is one at all, or whether we are talking about ideas in our mind, nothing is beyond the possibility of its being a make-believe. So he shows, he tries to he wants us to imagine the possibility of an evil genius which is all the time making us believe things which are not actually the cases. Now a modern rendering of more or less the same kind of argument is what has generally come to be known as brain in the wet example. Now, in its modern rendering, there's this argument that has been cited by many modern philosophers that there's always this possibility that maybe what I'm experiencing, what I'm thinking right now, is basically happening to a brain that is actually there, maybe existing in some possible wet somewhere, we don't know where, and maybe since whatever we believe, whatever right now I'm seeing, whatever right now you are seeing, this lecture that I'm presenting right now, maybe all of us are experiencing it happening because a certain brain sort of possibly our brain or whatever brain in some wet is being given some electrical impulses or some kind of stimuli of whatever kind, which makes this brain to think that such and such thing is happening. So overall, the idea here is that anything that we experience is basically happening in the mind in terms of electrical impulses, in terms of certain changes, electrical changes or whatever kind of synaptical changes, neuroscientific changes, that happen, neuroscientific processes that keep on happening in our mind all the time. But since there is some kind of something, something that can be emulated about them, that can be sort of simulated about them, Therefore, this possibility always remains that what we are experiencing right now is a result of simulation that may be happening to some brain somewhere. So maybe, this world that we are experiencing right now is a simple make-believe, and many of us know that this idea has been exploited as a plot in some of the films as well, like Matrix, and there are several other Hollywood films where this idea of this world being just a mere set of stimuli happening in our mind has been exploited. So now, having said that, what we want to look at in this lecture is what could be the possible answers or replies to such epistemic stand, that we find in skepticism. Could there be, any kind of sort of emergence from this epistemic predicament that a skeptic presents us with? So now for an answer to that, actually the first modern philosopher who tried to present an answer to this was Descartes. Descartes, begins his search for indubitable foundations for knowledge by doubting everything. So what he says is that, see, our sense experiences are amenable to doubt in any case. It's easily provable because we see dreams. Dreams is something that we very often go through, and it's very much possible. Nothing, no logical contradiction happens when we want to take this proposition that right now also we may be in a dream. So, sense experiences could be easily doubted. But then immediately from sense experience, he moves on to some of the ideas inside our mind. For example, mathematical truths. And as I just said a few moments back, these mathematical truths could also be doubted because these are also ultimately processes happening inside our mind. And so far as that is the case, there is always this possibility that our mind is actually not sort of working under our influence. Maybe our mind is subject to, certain processes which are being operated not by us but by somebody else. So, he presents, the possibility of this make-believe world, but he emerges, he shows us why such scenarios are not possible, and how there is a possibility for firm foundation for knowledge. How does he argue for that? He says, first of all, I need to exist even in order to be deceived. So what he means is, his famous dictum, I think, therefore I exist. So, even in order to be deceived, I need to exist in the sense that, sort of even when I'm doubting, I'm doubting, the possibility of my sense experience to be a case of dreaming, even in that case, something that I cannot deny is that I have certain ideas in my mind, namely, thinking that this could be a possible dream. So, thinking is something which, when denied, proves to be contradiction. Because even denial of it is a piece of thinking. Even when I, sort of deny something, that is something that is happening in my consciousness. So, the fact that even when I'm doubting, I'm thinking, this is a fact which is beyond doubt. So, the fact that I exist, has to be taken into account, even for me to show that I may be possibly in deception at the moment. So, this is one way, how we can emerge from skepticism. And he also from there goes on to argue that I cannot be mistaken about the diversity of ideas that we have at any point of time in my mind. And one of such ideas is an idea of a perfect being or idea of God. So now, this idea is very different from other ideas because, idea of God is the idea of a perfect being. And, the idea of a perfect being has to include the idea of existence within it in order to be perfect at all. Otherwise, it will be an imperfect idea. So, therefore, God as a perfect idea includes existence as something intrinsic to this idea. Therefore, since sort of the idea of a perfect being has within it the idea of existence in order to be a perfect idea at all, therefore the perfect being, namely God, has to exist. Now from there he derives a further proposition, which is that now this God, the idea of God also includes, also includes goodness and the fact of his omnipotence. So, since God by definition is also good and almighty, he cannot deceive us into believing something that is not the case. So, how the possibility of evil genius, how is the possibility of evil genius eliminated? Because God is, an idea which has reality intrinsic to it, because it's the idea of a perfect being. Now, God, since is by definition good and almighty, therefore, from the goodness of God, the proposition is derived that God would never create an evil genius, that would put us into a bad case. Bad case by bad case, what we mean is, a case where things that we see, our sense experience, doesn't correlate to the truth about the world. So, the idea of our sense experience being immune to the possibility of influences, being exerted by the evil genius is a sort of, this immunity is to our sense experience is offered by the possibility of God, by showing it as real and showing that such God would never want to create an evil genius which would put us into believing, which would make us believe untruth rather than truth. So this is how Descartes provides to us a possible answer to skepticism, mainly by appealing, by using the idea of God, as for the rescue of our sense experiences. Now we'll talk about some of such more possible answers in a short while from now. Thank you. Welcome back, viewers. So we were talking about Descartes and how first of all he begins with doubting everything, because he wanted to provide firm foundations for our knowledge enterprise. And he shows that that possibility exists because at least there is one truth that that is immune to doubt, which is I think therefore I am, and the other one is that evil genius would never exist because God would never do it. Now, having seen that, there could be some possible, arguments against the kind of solution that Descartes, or the kind of answer that Descartes seems to provide against skepticism. Now, one of those arguments is that God does not really, serve as a good device to rescue us from the kind of scenario that skeptic, confronts us with. So, one of the argument that would be offered against, God could be that maybe since God, after all, is also an idea, even if God is an idea of what has been called as a perfect being. But since it is an idea, just like mathematical truths, are operations that are certain processes, operations that we do, through our mind. Similarly, God, is also an idea that exists in our mind, and if evil genius could influence these ideas about mathematical truths in our mind, what reason do we have to believe that the idea of God, which is at the end of the day only an idea existing in our mind, what reasons do we have to believe that the idea of God is immune to the influence from evil genius? So overall, the point here is that maybe, what if the case is that evil genius has also, apart from many other ideas, has also put this idea inside our mind, namely that of God. So God, the idea of perfect being could also be an idea that evil genius has put inside our mind, just like the idea of just like just like mathematical truths. Apart from this objection, another objection is that just like perfect being has to exist, and just like the idea of perfect being has intrinsic to it the idea of existence, then anything that we call that is perfect in its realm would have to exist as well. So that would mean that perfect evil being, just like a perfect good being has to exist. Similarly, perfect evil being, since we have an idea of perfect evil being, has to exist too. So anything about which we have an idea of its perfection, in just by the virtue of the idea of that perfect concept, it has to have existence too. So that would mean just like there could be God as a perfect being as such, similarly perfect evil being also must exist. But overall point here is that perfection is something that is that is used as adjectival to something. So, we talk about perfect chairs, we talk about perfect tables, we talk about perfect human beings. But, what point is there in talking about perfection as such? So, perfection as such, we wouldn't talk about it in terms of its existence. We would talk about perfect chairs, perfect tables, and we may talk about their existence as well. But perfection as such, it's difficult to imagine what we want to imagine when we want to imagine perfection as such. Therefore, perfection, as a noun, is difficult to understand, though we have a conception of it, but it's a different kind of an idea. But generally speaking, we use perfection, as a noun, as an adjective, not perfection, as something that is that could possibly exist So therefore, similarly, the idea of being is something that we attach to something, So we know what it means for a chair to be. We know what it means for, a table to be. But we don't know what do we refer to when we talk about being as such. So being, is sort of something that is attached to some object. We, the idea of being as such, we don't know what we're talking about. So similarly, perfection. So this way, Descartes uses his idea of perfect being, and argues that the idea of that existence has to be intrinsic to it, but it doesn't seem to to be really very, very logical. This doesn't seem to be a very sound argument according to some scholars. So, and apart from that, of course, there are other possible objections, that come that we should be, if since God is a creator, and since He has created this world, and He has created, and it's just like God would never create an evil genius, would never want us to be influenced by an evil genius. Similarly, God, would, by definition, since He is a perfect being, she is a perfect being, would always create perfect objects, which includes us. So we should be perfect too, if created by a perfect being. And how can a perfect being, create imperfect beings? So, another way of arguing about, our not being in bad case, or our not being in, in a situation of illusion is that if God is by perfection, by definition a perfect being, then He can only create objects which are perfect too, and a world which is also perfect, which would mean that it should be a world already immune by definition of God. This should be a world immune from errors, and we should, by definition, since we are creatures of God, we should be immune to all such possibilities. So overall, the idea here is, why should other things come into picture? Since there are cases of error, undeniably the cases of error, which Descartes uses for his method of doubt. Since those cases are there, that means we are imperfect human beings. That also means that this world is also imperfect, because several situations, things don't appear to us along with their truth. They don't come along with their truth in their representations. So since that thing is undeniable, therefore we have a reason to believe that we are imperfect in terms of our sensibilities, and the world is also imperfect because at times we receive wrong representations of it. And this world and we being imperfect, therefore, this could be, it conflicts with the idea of God. So, these are some of the possible, these are some of the arguments, that are often offered, are often given against Descartes. Now, having seen, the arguments offered by Descartes, in more modern times, Russell offers, some different set of arguments which are, in a certain way more plausible, more commonsensical, which don't appeal to metaphysical notions like God and like evil genius. So Russell offers, arguments against skepticism, which are which appeal more to common sense, and which do not make much appeal to metaphysics. So what does Russell have to say about about our common sense experiences, and what does he have to say against skepticism? So Russell, in several of his works, including Our Knowledge of the External World, which is a book which is a title by one of the books by him, He says, bad cases are always possible. Bad case in the sense that, error situations, bad cases like, maybe I'm dreaming right now, maybe, sort of we all are brains in the vat. So, such kind of bad cases, are always possible. It always remains possible that, it could, quote unquote, it could be the case. But, all that skeptic is saying is that maybe this is the case. It is possible that it is the case. But, he doesn't go far from there to prove that it is actually the case. So, all that skeptic is saying is that maybe it is the case. No contradiction is involved when we think that this could be the case. But the actual challenge would be if skeptic could also show that it really is the case. So there's always this gap between the possibility and the reality. And Russell says, since we may always believe that we don't deny that the kind of possible scenarios that skeptic makes us aware of, those are possible scenarios. But also at the same time we know that these are not proven to be real scenarios. Therefore, we can, so far as that is the case, so far as their reality is not proven, we could always say, well, bad cases, bad cases are possible. They remain as possibilities, but they may not be real. So, skeptic has only shown that bad case is possible, not that it is real. So, as philosophers who believe in the possibility of knowledge, who want to argue for the possibility of knowledge, we could exploit the gap between being possible and being real. So, what we can do as upholders of possibility of knowledge, the real challenge that we have before us as philosophers who believe in the possibility of knowledge is to offer arguments against the bad case, against the reality of the bad case. So the onus upon the philosopher is not to show the impossibility of the bad case, to show that we could be in dream right now is impossible. Rather, we should offer arguments against against the possibility of this this world being a make believe. We should offer arguments against this situation being real. So, according to Russell, this is the actual challenge that we have before us, and we should offer arguments against the skeptic possibility being real. Now, what are the arguments that we could possibly offer against skeptic arguments? Russell says, it is true that we cannot go beyond our experiences. All that we know of an object before us is always in terms of some kind of sense experience. So the kind of sort of a chair that I see before me as an object. What is it apart from certain kind of appearance, certain kind of appearance of color, a certain kind of appearance of shape, and so on and so forth. So obviously, we cannot move beyond our experiences. This world is given to us only in terms of sense experience. And apart from those sense experiences, what this world is, I have no way to find out, because I have no access to this world apart from, my sense experience of it. But what good reasons do we have, Russell asks, to believe that our experiences are vacuous of reality? So, we need to ask ourselves, do we have good reasons? First of all, do we have good reasons to believe that this world is real? And similarly, on the same account, since, skeptic wants us, to believe otherwise, we'll have to think, what good reasons we have to believe that our experiences are vacuous of reality? Probably not many, because the cases of error are far and few. The cases of dream are far and few. But alternatively, we have various good reasons to believe that these experiences, our common sense experiences, come from the real things. So, common sense experiences, Russell argues, are simple, systematic explanation, and have also, apart from other things, regularity, at least more in degree, or if not, of kind, in the sense, there may not be absolute regularity, but there is a very, very fairly good regularity. So, skeptic argument, according to Russell, is unnecessarily far-fetched, and is too remote to be considered seriously. So, he basically asks us to weigh pros and cons. So, what he says is that, there is a possibility of our world being unreal. And that possibility is we cannot conclusively argue against it. So, but what do we have any good reasons to believe that this world is unreal? Alternatively, what good reasons do we have to believe that this world is real? According to Russell, the reasons we have to believe that this world is real far, outweigh the reasons that we have for believing that this world is unreal. So he says, I'm just like a judge sitting, and hearing a case. How do we judge a case? If world were to be a case, then how do we judge it? We want to hear, both the arguments for and against. And of course, as a judge, I do not conclusively know anything. I can only hear arguments for and against from, the two parties involved. Then I have to form a final judgment about the world. So this is what Russell says as a philosopher we should be doing. And when as philosophers we look at these two parties, these two arguments. One arguments against the unreality, again the arguments in favor of unreality, the possible unreality of the world, and the arguments in favor of our beliefs regarding the reality of this world. He says the argument for us to believe that this world is real are far more convincing than the arguments the arguments which are very, very remote in nature, which are offered against the reality of this world. So therefore, as philosophers, this is the best we can do. We can just put ourselves on the seat of a judge and look at both kind of arguments, and as philosophers, it seems to be a very clear case where we can clearly see that we have far many reasons to believe that this world is real, because our common sense beliefs are simple. More often than not, we always they prove themselves to be real. Say, for example, if I see a chair in front of me, being mistaken about it happens one in 100 times, one in 1,000 times. About bigger objects like chairs, probably it wouldn't happen even once in our lifetime. So dreams don't happen so very often, and so we have far many reasons to believe that our common sense experiences offer us good explanations, offer us good reasons to believe that this world is real, because they are simple, systematic explanations, and also explain regularity. Also, apart from that, Russell says our instinctive belief is that there is a world outside which fits well with common sense, but not not with the kind of belief that skeptic wants us to adhere to. We should reject our instinctive beliefs if we show that it was inconsistent with other instinctive beliefs, but that doesn't happen. Our instinctive beliefs, are in perfect harmony with some other instinctive beliefs. So, like if I see a chair and if I sit on it, both of them happen. So, but if we believe that the outer world exists, we can have a consistent, robust scientific theory about the world, including how sense perceptions are generated and how dreams happen at all. So, based upon our common sense beliefs, we can have a good scientific theory, and we also have explanations for how dreams happen, how dream can also be explained with the kind of knowledge theory that we have developed during the passage of time. So we could replace indubitability with reasonableness. If our sense perceptions are not beyond doubt, they are at least reasonable, in the sense that we have pretty good reasons to believe that they are true. Skepticism is a remote possibility, but science, looking at how it has worked so far, in the sense that science, the way it has worked for us so far, should not therefore be replaced by some indubitable foundations, which are waiting to be discovered. So he says, instead of being convinced by the skeptic and waiting, for certain indubitable foundations, we should keep working with the knowledge theory, the theory of knowledge, that generally scientists are working with, and there is no reason for us to entertain such remote possibilities so seriously that we stop working with our common sense beliefs. So overall, he says, our common sense beliefs are, much better realm of ideas, set of ideas to work with, rather than, working with the skeptic's idea that this world could be elusive all the time. Because, in that case, we would be leading a very funny life. Actually, as a matter of fact, it is said about some of the ancient skeptics who were actually not using skepticism just as a tool, a challenge to be overcome, to demonstrate the possibility of knowledge. They were actually taking it very seriously. They were living it out. So some of the early Greek skeptics are believed it is believed about them that they were always accompanied by some of their students, because they would at times just do funny things, since they were too suspicious of everything. So in order to really see that what they are seeing right in front of them is a river, they may want to take a dip into it, but it is too deep, maybe it is dangerous. So if we start testing each of our beliefs like this, it will be a very difficult scenario. So it's much better to live to work, to keep living with our with set of our ordinary beliefs, with our common sense experience, rather than taking skeptics scenario, a remote possibility, taking it seriously. That would put us into a very different, difficult, funny kind of situation. So now, having understood the Russell's arguments against skepticism, we must look at some of the possible objections against Russell's answers to skepticism. Now, some of the possible objections are: is our common sense really that simple an explanation? So our common sense beliefs, they appear to be simple, but they are, metaphysically loaded. So, in the sense that, what I see right now before me, may be just patches of color here and there. It is a kind of, just a collage of colors, but I form a judgment. And that judgment, when I form a judgment, it's a serious consequence. It's not that simple something. So the kind of common sense, the way our common sense works appears to be simple, but it is not such a simple thing. It's a huge jump. Just because, say for example, I've seen things happening in the past, I tend to believe that the same thing will happen in the future also. But only explanation for that is reflex. We reflexively, out of reflex, we tend to believe that that it would regularly happen in future as well. But we could be seriously jeopardized if we actually if we unexaminedly without any examination we sort of work upon such beliefs. So doubt sort of rescues us. So therefore common sense always involves big jump from sense experience to to the actual nature of the world, which is a huge philosophical, metaphysical question. So it's a huge jump. It's not as simple as Russell wants us to believe. Apart from that, another objection against Russell is that all experiences come from one evil genius rather than infinite number of objects is an equally simple hypothesis. So if simplicity of common sense was anything to value it for, anything to go by, then the argument, Descartes' argument, his imagination about an evil genius is equally simple. It's just a simple sort of case. He wants us to imagine one evil genius which accounts for whatever ever we see in a world. Similarly, brain in a vat. It's in just one fell swoop, it presents to us an explanation for every possible experience that we ever might have. So somebody could argue that these explanations offered by a skeptic are equally simple. Also, so what is at stake here is the larger question is, what is Russell's definition of a simple hypothesis? He should sort of clarify that. Some scholars argue he hasn't sufficiently explained that. Also, so far as there is doubt, how can there be knowledge? Russell gives us a picture to the best of our belief. He gives us a picture of this world to the best of our beliefs. But a picture, to the best of our beliefs still falls short of, knowledge per se. Knowledge, the idea of knowledge, that we consider, we take into consideration as philosophers. Similarly, it is argued that there is always a difference between being reasonable and being right or true about a belief. So, the question of being right or the question of truth, is not tantamount to being reasonable and therefore cannot be reduced to being reasonable. In philosophy, we are not looking for, we are not content with possible truths. The enterprise of knowledge always remains alive, perpetual, because, the search is not for reasonability. The search is for the truth, knowledge per se. And knowledge per se cannot be reduced to to the best of our beliefs. Belief is not, the jump from belief to knowledge is not, a matter of degrees. It's a difference of kind. So therefore, the best of our belief is still not knowledge, and philosophy as an enterprise, what it's searching for is not the best of something, but the absolute truth about the world. So in that sense, isn't what Russell's suggesting to us, isn't Russell's suggestion about our sense experience being reasonable, tantamount to giving up the idea of truth altogether? And if we are doing that, isn't that too much being given away? As philosophers, can we really afford to give that away? These are some of the objections that are placed against Russell. So in this lecture, we looked at what we mean by skepticism, and more importantly, the possible answers to it. We would look at more of such answers in our next lecture. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.